Hello and welcome to this edition of the Our Future, Our Voice NI campaign, leading the conversation for COP26, hosted by Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the biodiversity crisis and also some issues around public transport. And to go through this very fascinating topic, we have Dr.Sue Christie, who is the chair of our very own Keep Northern Ireland Beautiful. Sue, you're very welcome.
Thank you, David.
So I just want to start off by asking, what are the challenges in Northern Ireland at the moment with the biodiversity crisis?
Basically, we have something locally that is a problem on every single big global issue. We do not have our habitats and species in very good condition. Somebody was saying the other day that we're about number 9th from the bottom of 250 countries in the world in terms of actually protecting what we've got. We've got issues around agriculture and the impacts on biodiversity. If you look around our land, we see that it is very, very green. However, green is not biodiverse. Green is lots and lots of ryegrass. We are very good at producing grass. We're very good at producing the meat and milk that is produced from that grass. But it is not good for biodiversity. There's very little living in the grass, and there's often relatively little living in the soil. And the soil is so crucial to our biodiversity and to overall survival.
And so, obviously, when we're talking about this, often people can see, well, how does that impact me? So I know that this is something that you're very passionate about. So bring it down to the real time. So to someone listening to this, why should they be paying attention to what's going on?
Many of the people here will remember when they were children, or maybe they're still children, but they can remember when they were younger, that it was, if you walked around outside, you often saw a lot of birds, a lot of butterflies, bees, spiders, other invertebrates. Sometimes they were kind of a pain. If you drove down the road in years past, there were bugs splattering on your windshield. You don't see that anymore. Now, you may say, well, that's great because I don't really like bugs. But if you don't have the insects, you don't have the birds or the mammals that feed on those insects. If you don't have smaller birds and mammals like mice, you don't have the predators that feed on them. We really need to have functioning systems for biodiversity in order for it to thrive. And that's where we're undermining by killing directly through use of pesticides and herbicides and other chemicals, but also through going for this monoculture of grass when we really need a lot more diversity. It's relatively easy to do. The other things that people will see is a lot more green and a lot less in terms of different habitats. We're very, very low on woodland in Northern Ireland. We have been forever, really, since about I think it's about the 1500s we lost all of our trees here. We're the lowest tree cover area in Europe, and of that tree cover that we do have, an awful lot is exotic Sitka spruce, which does not support our native wildlife. We desperately need to plant more trees, but as part of a whole system approach, getting areas that are biodiverse to break up the monoculture of just grassland. Doesn't mean we don't have to have grassland. We obviously do. We need to agriculture. We need to produce more of our own food, not necessarily just grass, but more of our own food. But we need areas within that serve as reservoirs of the plants and the animals, which can then be natural predators, pollinators, and everything else that a biodiverse countryside will provide, as well as beauty, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've been talking about there about, I know something that, that's been talked about is, kind of rewilding and things like that. So could you walk us through a wee bit about that? I mean, are we making much progress on that? I know it's a bit more of a debate now within the sector, but are we seeing much more of that out there?
We're not yet in Northern Ireland. We are in places like Scotland, so it isn't very far away, and the benefits of it are becoming really recognized. A lot of times people think that rewilding is actually introducing big apex predators like wolves or bears. I don't think mostly that's what we're talking about. What we're talking about is getting those natural systems back in place. And it can be simply widening our the unplowed area next to a hedgerow. It can be taking the small areas that we've got and connecting them with corridors of wildlife, which could be just more hedgerows. Mm-hmm. We can increase the diversity of the habitats we've got. We've got lovely ancient woodland, but they're actually decreasing rather than increasing. And we need to be planting more trees to up that amount. Our peatlands are world class, but they're degrading and they're under an awful lot of threat from agriculture, from drainage, from development, from even really positive things like wind farms. They still do end up negatively impacting on our peatlands. If you were going to pick a habitat in Northern Ireland that is equivalent to the tropical rainforest, it would be peatland because it stores carbon, it is highly biodiverse, it's got some lovely plants and lovely animals if you like small creepies, which I do. It's a fascinating habitat, but it's under threat. We have wetlands of all sorts. We have lakes, we have rivers and streams and just little boggy bits. Mm-hmm. And that has a whole different complex of animals and plants that go to make it up. And all of these are under threat.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, in terms of how we're tackling this, you've talked a bit about rewilding. You've talked a bit about the need to plant more woodlands. Is there anything else that you would like to see from local policymakers and, in terms of tackling this, in terms of actually properly getting a handle on it? I mean, we're seeing some councils talk about planting 1 million trees and we're seeing things like that. But is there anything that we can do to kind of scale this up? Because, some of the figures are pretty shocking about, just the challenge that we're up against.
It certainly is. The positive sign is that everybody can do something. It may mean planting some chives on your windowsill, or it may be growing a significant portion of your own food in your garden. It may be taking half of your lawn and turning it into a vegetable patch or a flowery meadow. We are very, very low on the plant species that support our pollinators. Now, you think, why do we need pollinators? Most of our food requires pollinators. Apples require pollinators. Bees require pollinators. It's beans. Sorry, not bees. Bees are pollinators. And we need to encourage those animals. And we can all plant flowers and herbs that actually support them. They might be native wildflowers, or they might be cultivated plants that actually support wildlife. So everybody can do a little bit. We need to have policies to increase the biodiversity in our open countryside. So improving what farmers do for wildlife will maybe take a very small amount of land out of production, but it will more than compensate by the decrease in the amount of other chemicals that have to be supplied, et cetera, et cetera. We need to look at how we do agriculture, not just what we do. We need to look at what we do in that if we increase the range of different crops that we have and that we produce, we will be able to increase biodiversity just because those crops are important. That will provide local food, which will mean that people will have a local access to food and not be dependent totally on getting our food shipped in from across the world. And we need to look at having wild areas that provide the pollinators for those different crops. We also need to do something about our good habitats. And there was a report a few years ago that basically said For wild areas, we need more of them. We need them to be bigger. We need them to be better. That means that they need to be managed. If you have a wild area, you don't just let it go and not do anything about it. You have to actively manage it, and connect it. And that is so crucial. And I was talking before about hedgerows being a pathway, an avenue by which animals can move from one area to another. And this makes it much better for biodiversity. Larger animals can actually survive in a smaller overall area if it is composed of really connected bits and pieces.
Yeah, and obviously there's a big global gathering coming up soon. This is one of the reasons why we're here. COP26 in Glasgow, not too far away. What are you hoping to see from that? I mean, we talked about a big agenda here, but in terms of not just what we've just spoken about, but in terms of the wider climate emergency agenda, what are you hoping to see from it?
I'm hoping for commitment from all of the people who are there. Now, there's probably several different sorts of people at COP, but there are two really big sorts. There are the politicians who are going to make the decisions. And there are the NGOs and concerned scientists and everybody else who wants to convince the politicians of what they need to do. This is not new. We have been knowing what needs to be done to improve our biodiversity, to decrease the impacts of climate change, to decrease the severity of climate change by addressing our carbon sequestration in biodiverse lands, in managing our soils properly. The difference between a poorly managed soil and a positively managed soil for the amount of carbon that can sequester is orders of magnitude. We need to really address that. What can COP do about it? We as the scientists and the NGOs can really convince the politicians to act. We also need, as citizens, to give them the permission and the backing to act, because it's all very well for the prime minister or the president to say, oh, we want to do such and such. But if the public aren't backing them at the ballot box, if they aren't backing them in terms of agreeing to these policies, if they aren't understanding the role that they can play as individuals, as well as what government needs to do, the politicians will maybe make fine statements, but they won't follow through on it. And what we've seen every COP, this is COP 26. Now, that means we've been dealing with this as a major issue. This is the 26th year. It's actually the 27th because last year didn't happen. We really need action now. It is seriously serious. It is not a case of, well, this will impact on our children. This will impact on our grandchildren. This is impacting on us now. It is impacting on us here with more severe weather. Never mind what is happening in Australia and Canada and America with fires, and Brazil. The lungs of the world, the Amazonian rainforest, are being destroyed every minute. It is impacting on the people who can least afford it the most. So people who live in Africa are suffering from droughts, which are climate related. The people that are living on coastal cities in India are suffering from flooding. We are dealing with an incipient climate refugee crisis, which puts every other refugee crisis that we are seeing to shame. And they're bad enough as it is now, but we are going to be dealing with millions of people who are not going to be able to feed themselves in their current countries because of drought, floods, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously a bit of the focus of what we're looking at is about, you spoke very well there about citizens and about us giving the permission to leaders to take big decisions. Obviously, part of focus is about younger people. And I know, Sue, you've been around the environment sector for decades. And I know you're very active. I know you're very active in the Eco Skills program as well. What would you say to younger people who, again, have shown fantastic leadership on this issue over the last 3 or 4 years? What would you say to them going up to this conference, and what would be your advice to them?
talk to your parents, talk to your teachers, talk to everybody that you know. Make sure they understand how important this is, because David, you're absolutely right. The children understand. They've been through the Eco Schools program. They know what is happening. It's their world that we are destroying. I know that's a cliche, but it is absolutely true. They need to take the big strides themselves and make sure that the politicians, their own parents, everybody listens to them as saying, this is our priority. We cannot wait. We have got to act now, and we will tell you what we want to see done. And it is your responsibility as the politicians who lead us to actually take those big decisions, because so much of what needs done needs a legislative basis, and it needs fiscal drivers. It needs money to invest in it. There are potential for thousands of jobs in Northern Ireland, not thousands of jobs across the UK, thousands of jobs in Northern Ireland in various aspects of environmental work, from insulating buildings to increasing the renewable infrastructure, to planting and growing local gardens, to building up our own biodiversity, to rewilding areas, to making sure that we have the effort that is needed in order to actually deliver on improved biodiversity. It does take effort. It does take manpower. The government has to invest in that money, and the people have to be willing to put in that labor, but be paid for it, obviously. So there's a huge opportunity for people who are just coming out of school now, and for the even younger people to say, no, this is my world. You guys have messed it up. I want a better world to live in. And this is what I want to see you do, Mr.
Okay.
Politician, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Prime Minister.
Okay, well, that's a lovely, optimistic, very empowering note to end on. Sue, thank you so much for coming along and sharing your insights on the biodiversity crisis, and also giving that nice rallying cry as well at the end. Dr. Sue Christie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.